Right, Tiana. Well, welcome so much to the Private Practice Elevation podcast. Excited to chat with you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on. I'm also excited to talk about all things compliance.
Yeah, and I don't think we've ever spoken about compliance on this podcast, so this is good. I'm really enjoying getting into some new topics, and like I said before I hit record, I am not a therapist myself. My wife is, so you know, I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm definitely not in that world every single day. My world is really websites and marketing and SEO and all that stuff, but it really I love to learn a little bit more, just about the ins and outs. So why don't you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am Dr. Tiana Kelly, and I'm currently a licensed professional counselor in Pennsylvania with Move Forward Counseling. And within Move Forward, I also am a compliance officer. That's really where I got my start in the compliance world. And I've been tasked and responsible really with like developing our compliance program. And so I work a lot one-on-one with our therapists, trying to tighten up their documentation. And of course, going back and forth with CEO, COO about, just different like policies and things that we can tighten up and, try to make sure in every area possible that we are in compliance. And I've really learned, it is an ongoing pursuit. Every time you think like everything is solid, you're good, something comes up and you're like, oh, okay, we should check that out and
Yeah.
try to strengthen up some things over here. So that is kind of my counselor compliance officer end of things. And now I have also alongside our CEO of Move Forward Counseling, started Private Practice by Design, which is a consulting business that focuses on providing business consultation services. And then the end that I handle is compliance consultation services to help other practices
Mhm.
either tighten up whatever compliance program they currently have or help, from the ground up really develop some different compliance protocol.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I want to start at like the beginning. Like I said, I don't know too much about compliance other than what I hear, from my wife and as she's building her group practice, things that she needs to do. So for a newbie who's really maybe just starting to build their practice, like what exactly is compliance and why does it matter?
Yeah, great question. And I don't know that there's like the most straightforward answer to that or an answer that anyone's really going to find super appealing because I think of compliance in every single aspect of what we do.
Yeah.
So, there are things within our sessions that we obviously need to do to make sure that we're protecting client privacy, and that's especially important and ramped up since we've moved a lot of our work to telehealth and we're working from home. And
Yeah.
so, our therapists need to make sure they're doing things to maintain confidentiality and privacy and security, make sure we're upholding standards of HIPAA. And then, of course, the administrative side, our admin staff have to make sure that they're doing the same things to uphold whatever, client privacy and security. Billing, same thing, right? There
Hmm.
are different billing practices you need to make sure that are in place to, obviously make sure that you're preventing fraud and waste and abuse and all of these things. And I think, the in the day to day, what I find to be a focus for like private practice as a whole is like your policies, your procedures, making sure you're operating from a lens of compliance. And what I mean by that is
Hmm.
really like what does HIPAA require us to do? What does our ethics code require us to do? What does
Yeah.
state law require us to do? What paperwork do they require us to have signed? So of course, we're making sure that all of that is up to speed. And then documentation. That's a huge, day in and day out, multiple sessions a day for, however many therapists are in your practice. We need to make sure that we are, upholding our payer requirements and standards. And then, of course, all of the standards of HIPAA and any state law.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, for me on the outside looking in, that sounds like a lot. And I think, one of the things that we emailed about, like with this conversation, you mentioned we can talk about like how can we build these compliance practices without burning out our team, because like when I hear like, oh wow, all these things that you all need to comply with, it seems like a lot of work to make sure all that stuff is in place. And so, now you're providing consultation on compliance for other practices. So what are some of those things that you encourage folks to maybe start with in order to not get so overwhelmed by this process?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest pieces that I've personally learned in doing this work is the importance of going slow and being okay with that. One of the pieces of feedback I've gotten through my life is like, I'm super ambitious. I'm a go-getter. I want to say like, let's change this and let's do it yesterday. And I've
Hmm.
really had to learn, especially working within a group that has, at this point, it's around 60 therapists, like that mentality is just not going to work. Though like HIPAA is going to tell us like you've got to change this yesterday. And
Right.
yes, like we have to be upheld by that standard. But it's going to take some time. If you say you need to make sure in your notes that you're documenting X, Y, and Z, some therapists are going to catch on as soon as you tell them that, and some it's just going to take a little bit of time. And you continue to, promote that accountability with them, but you also recognize like this is a change. And a lot of times as humans, especially as humans who have endured a lot of change over the last couple of years, like we're just resistant to it. So I think
Yeah.
that's a big piece is just making sure that you're being mindful of how fast you're trying to push changes. And especially so if like you haven't really developed much of a compliance program and now you're like interested and invested in doing so, you can't roll out all of those changes all at one time, or that is going to be, that's going to be a recipe for people ready to walk out the door because it's overwhelming. So
Yeah.
you want to kind of like strategize and figure out, what is the most important to make sure that we are holding people accountable for and trying to implement those changes first. And then, work down your list. And, that's something that I work with practices with to just try to figure out and prioritize like where can we make the most amount of change but in the most reasonable way possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it kind of like starting with you even just mentioned mentioned working through a list? Is it really starting with those key places and then start to create those processes?
Yeah, for sure. And like I'll give kind of more of a maybe tangible example. So if you think about like our documentation and when I rolled out our like a new chart audit form, it was pretty extensive in comparison to what had been used before. And I'm still in the process of like focusing in on newer areas more and more, if that makes sense. So in the beginning, I would point out the things that were a little bit less minor but easier to change, right? Like, oh, I see in your intake, you didn't document anything about whether they're on medications. Okay, make sure that we're trying to
Hmm.
do that in the future. That's something that our payers want to see. And so then, once I started to see some changes with that across the board amongst our therapists, then I moved to some of the bigger pieces like let's actually look at what is the focus of your session, what is the content that you're including in there, and how can we
Right.
clean that up and tighten that up. But that's not something that I would have jumped in with first because that's a bigger undertaking and much more overwhelming to have therapists be like, wait a minute, you mean like the stuff that I'm actually documenting isn't
Hmm.
maybe what I should be documenting, and that is a recipe for overwhelm.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as you're speaking about this, I'm going kind of back to the beginning of when you're onboarding new therapists. Like this
Mhm.
sounds like training where you really need to train your therapist on compliance and how do you do your documentation. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes. And this is something I think we've learned as we've grown at Move Forward is just that very fact that, oh, we actually do need to be telling people kind of exactly what they need to have in their documentation.
Yeah.
And I think that, it seems obvious once you look in hindsight, but also, we all go through relatively the same training and we all know that we're trained in documentation and how to document. But I think what gets lost in that puzzle is how every place you work is going to require a little bit of a different style,
Yeah.
especially as you look across the different like intensity levels. You have your PHP, IOP, that's going to look very different in documenting than private practice is going to look. And so I think people get confused and they're just like, I don't know. Also, just differences in EHRs. EHRs will prompt you to put
Yeah.
different things in different sections, or they might call it something different. So I think it's our responsibility, as practice owners, compliance officers, to help guide therapists so they know exactly what to put in there. And that's also protective from, a practice owner, practice management standpoint too. If you're able to
Hmm.
provide that training, you can say up front, I provided the training, they, showed that they understood, whatever the case might be. That sounds a lot better than if something happens and you say, I didn't train them on it. So yeah, I guess I
Absolutely.
couldn't have made the assumption that they would know.
Yeah, yeah. And that kind of brings us full circle back to the importance of having a compliance program and, working through this stuff. And it really does sound like this is really something that just changes and grows, because you might hire and onboard and train a therapist, and then you kind of change how you do some documentation or some aspect of your compliance, and then okay, well, with the next one we got to make sure that that's added to the onboarding, and so it's kind of this process where you include more, you train more, and that just kind of keeps you covered and growing.
Yes, yes. And I think that piece of it, number one, that piece is important. And also just being transparent with that. When I'm meeting with our therapists that we're onboarding, I will tell them, or, even just therapists that might request a documentation consult, I will tell them like, hey, this is what I'm telling you today. This
Hmm.
could change tomorrow, right? I
Right.
could be asking for more or something different tomorrow. And it's not,
Hmm.
because I'm trying to be a pain or trying to be annoying. It's because either one, I've learned more, because you could spend multiple lifetimes, I think, learning about the ins and outs of all of the different facets of compliance in private practice. So, I am going to continue to learn more, which means I am going to make some changes in what's, required for our
Yeah.
practice. But also, just industry wide, there's going to be changes, right? If you're an insurance
Yeah.
based practice, they might mix things up and, give us new stuff that we need to include or different stuff that we need to include. The rollout of AI, that's going to shape some
Hmm.
things, not just with our payers, but also, in terms of what HIPAA considers, what our state law considers, and what
Hmm.
we can and cannot do in the use of AI. So
Yeah.
ever evolving and hard to keep up with, but I think important to keep up with.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really hard to keep up with. To me, again, as an outsider, like I'm such a like I just want things to be like so simple, and man, you all have to work, pretty hard to do what you do, and just yeah, just so much respect for this for therapists and this community for sure. Well, what are
Yeah.
some of those mistakes that you feel like people make as they're, building these compliance programs and really trying to build a solid practice that stays compliant?
Yeah. I'm going to start with the one that is going to make maybe the least amount of sense, but I'll make it make sense. And it's just that whole idea of like you don't know what you don't know. You kind of go into it and you're like, I know I need to be compliant, but I don't know what that means.
Hmm.
And that's often a place where I think people are just like, I'll get to it next week.
Right.
And then that's where we make some errors and mistakes, and hopefully it doesn't lead to that HIPAA violation and all of the consequences that can come with that. But I mean, ultimately, like if you aren't knowledgeable yourself or trying to gain that knowledge from somewhere, someone, you're going to probably unintentionally make some errors, right? You're going to, maybe step up or stand up, walk away from that computer, leave it unattended, but you're at home. And what if your kids are there, your spouse is there? Like you're going to
Hmm.
make those mistakes because you just don't, it's not in the forefront of your mind.
Right.
So I think with that, as professionals, we are supposed to get regular HIPAA training, and I think that is a piece that we need to make sure that we're doing. Either not either, but it should be at least one of the two, either therapists going and getting that training themselves, and or practice owners. They should definitely be providing that in
Hmm.
some way, shape, or form. So that way we don't have as many I guess just gaps in that you don't know what you don't know. You start to kind of satisfy those gaps like, oh yeah, I should be
Yeah.
mindful of, my open access computer when I'm at home, or I should be mindful of, whatever the case might be. And I think some other pieces is just maybe a little bit centered more around like our day-to-day practice. So like as therapists, we might not consider this part of compliance, but again, it is like we can kind of weave anything into that compliance lens. Things like boundary violations, for instance. I'm talking even just like you might text your client, but is it going beyond scheduling? And are you starting to talk
Hmm.
about like clinical stuff? And that's especially important, like if your practice is a policy against that.
Yeah.
Could be, boundary violations like that, stuff you just don't know, accidental stuff like I sent the wrong PHI to another client and had a breach in that sense. A lot
Mm.
of it is the stuff that we either don't know or we're moving to fast or we're not being mindful about.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like slow down. That's good. That's good
Mhm.
advice right there. I can't tell you how many times I sent the wrong email, but
Yeah.
it didn't have to do with HIPAA. So um, yeah, and just kind of keep those things in the forefront of your mind with training. That's really good. I know, from experience when my wife has gone to those different trainings and she comes back, she's like, "Oh, there's these things that we need to now update," and she wouldn't know that had she not gone to the training with the people who this is their every day. Folks like yourself, you're really on top of that. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, I think comes like you just have to be open to the idea of not knowing. You just have to be open to that
Hmm.
idea of like, oh, I need to make some changes. Like maybe
Yeah.
I thought I had a really solid private practice, and you probably still do. It's just here's this like facet of it that you were really never taught about until you sought it out. I
Right.
didn't in grad school take a single course on
Hmm.
compliance or on practice management or anything like that. So it's like once you get in that position, and even as therapists, if you're not a practice owner, you should be seeking out some kind of compliance trainings, and probably more than just the annual to biannual one to keep it fresh
Yeah.
in your mind.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think it's all, just super important to stay open to that idea that like I'm not going to know everything and I'm going to have to seek out um, some help from people who have done some of this work and have gained some knowledge into this topic.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, that's kind of a good segue into, like what you're doing now. So why don't you tell us just a little bit more like how people can find more resources, including your consultation for sure, and just kind of like how can people start to put this on the forefront of their mind a little more often?
Yeah, so our services, if you're interested in just checking out a little bit more about compliance consultation, checking out our blog where we'll have, tons of information on just different things that you can be doing behind the scenes. Our website is www.privatepracticebydesign.com. And, within that, we have business consultation services, which are performed by Allison Pigeon, and then the compliance consultation services, which I will be handling. And within those services, it's kind of laid out into tiers based on, how much support you feel you need, or depending, on your practice size. But we'll really sit down and just have kind of an individualized consultation meeting to figure out what is it that you're looking for, how much support do you feel you need. We might choose one of those tiers, or we might, just customize a package for you. And within those services, this is a little bit dependent on the tiers, but some of the things that are offered is that compliance training where we
Hmm.
talk about HIPAA and telehealth, in-person session etiquette, documentation standards, like A to Z, basically, in terms of compliance. And I'm sure over the years that training will only continue to grow and grow and grow as I continue to learn more.
Yeah.
So we've got the HIPAA training that can take place for your practice staff. I also offer individualized consultation meetings, both with practice owners or compliance officers or both, and individual therapists. So if you have someone who's maybe struggling with documentation, we can take a look at, what's going on, what is making it challenging for them, how do we overcome some of those barriers. And then I also, we'll take a look if this is something that you're interested in at looking at your policies and seeing like, where might we be able to tighten something up? Where
Hmm.
does it look like maybe something is missing? And then finally, chart auditing. So if this is something that you're like, I know I need to do, which we are supposed to all be doing within our practices. I know I need to be doing this. I don't have time for it. It's always the thing that I say I'll get to on Friday, and I just never do. I can come in and take a look at some of those charts and just give you, kind of chart audit, strengths, weaknesses. Here's the areas to improve. Here's what's going well. Um, so yeah,
That's great. Great. I love it. So it sounds like, everything from education and resources down to one-on-one consultation. So that's fantastic.
yes,
And a bit
exactly.
and a big plug for Allison as well. I've worked with Allison for a few years now. We helped build the Move Forward website back in the
Amazing.
day, and yeah, she knows her stuff. So how many locations does Move Forward have now? It's like
Oh, we are
six or
up to,
seven.
yeah, seven or eight. I have to go
Yeah.
and
And
check.
and
Yeah.
and about
Yeah.
60 clinicians or
Yep.
so
Yep. 60 or
online,
probably
in
hitting
person.
closer to 65. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yep.
she's definitely scaled and grown, doing a lot of great work. So
For
so
sure.
shout out to her if she's listening.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Tiana. It was really good to just learn a little bit more about compliance. And yeah, is there any, final thoughts that you have on this subject?
That's a really great catch-all question, and
Put you on the spot there.
it could take me into the next 24 hours of like, what are the concluding points? No, I think the biggest piece is really just, if you've made it to this point in the episode and are following along or listening, I hope that you're able to stay open to the idea of compliance within your practice. And I hope that you're able to, take some of the tidbits and feedback here, of it, like taking it slow, like, you need
Yeah.
to maybe develop something from the ground up, but it doesn't, again, HIPAA, our laws are going to say like we should have it done yesterday and we should, but if you're
Hmm.
able to just kind of move a little bit slowly through
Yeah.
it and prioritize and figure out what is the stuff, the bare bones stuff that I really need to implement right now that I think my staff is going to be most receptive to, and then implement it, right? Hit the ground running and start building that compliance program. If you're making efforts to do so, that's going to sound a lot better should something happen than if you say like, no, I knew I was supposed to, but I just
Mm,
didn't.
yeah.
That's not going
Right.
to look very good.
Yeah. Right. Oh, good advice. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, Tiana, and it was great having you on the podcast. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.